Okay, so today in math we are going to be looking at lesson 3.1 in our Go Math materials. You are going to need pages 151 through 156. You're also going to need a pencil. Here it says that you're going to need colored pencils and a straight edge, which is just a ruler. If you want to bring those with you, you can. If you don't have those materials, that's totally fine. I'm just going to use my pen. Please make sure you're using a pencil throughout this lesson in case you need to erase, okay? So this lesson is about the thousandths place, okay? And we're gonna be moving into decimals now. We're gonna be talking about parts of a number, okay? So when I say parts of a number, I'm talking about fractions, decimals, things like that. And this is all gonna make sense as we work through our problems, okay? So we're at the part where it says investigate at the top, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so we can see what we're doing here. All right, thousandths are smaller parts than hundredths. If 1/100th is divided into 10 equal parts, each part is 1,000th. Okay, so one thing we need to know is the vocabulary here. Notice on the end of the word thousandth, it's TH, not an S. It's not thousands, it's thousandth. Okay, okay? All right, so use the model at the right to show tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. So that's this model right over here. Okay, it's this bigger square and the smaller square next to it, okay? We're going to actually go through A, B, and C, and we're going to be writing in and using our model on this side, okay? So part A says divide the larger square, so that's this big square here, into 10 equal columns or rectangles. So before we read the rest of this, let's do that. Divide the larger square into 10 equal columns or rectangles. So we're going to, and it's nice because they kind of give you these notches to work with so you don't have to like eye it. Okay, so 10 equal pieces. By no means am I an artist. By no means can I draw a straight line, so I hope your lines are a little bit nicer than mine. That's why they tell us to use a straight edge, but that's okay. All right. So now that we've done that, we've got 10 pieces here, 10 columns, 10 rectangles. They're kind of tall rectangles, but we've got 10 of those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? Now let's read the second part of this. Shade one rectangle. Okay, so one of the rectangles we are going to shade. I am going to just kind of lightly, it's hard to do it lightly with the pen, but shade in one of those rectangles, okay? So you can see I chose this one. What part of the whole, so the whole is this entire picture, is the shaded rectangle, okay? So we have to take a look at just the shaded part, and we have to say, okay, one out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces is shaded. Okay, so 1/10 of that square, the big square, is shaded because 1 out of 10 of the rectangles is shaded. Okay, 1/10. Now that last part says write that part as a decimal and a fraction. Okay, so we wrote it as a fraction. 1 out of the 10 pieces is shaded in. So 1/10, and this is going to make sense when we do our place value chart for decimals, but to write 1/10 as a decimal, you would just write it as 0.1 because that 1 represents the one that's shaded in the tenths position after the decimal point. Okay, let's look at part B. Part B, we're going to read this step by step and do it little by little, okay? Divide each rectangle into 10 equal squares. So we have 10 rectangles. We're going to divide them into 10 squares. So we're going to go like this and draw the lines straight across. They give you those notches to work with, which does make our life a little easier. Okay, take a minute to do that. If you have to pause this video to catch up, go ahead and do that. If you have to go back to see what we've done, go ahead and do that. Okay, so we've divided each of these rectangles into smaller squares. Okay, so there's 10 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, 10 total little squares in that big rectangle that we created at the very beginning. So then it says to use a different color. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep using this pen. Use a different color to shade in one of the squares. Let's shade in this one up here. Okay, in that top corner. What part of the whole is the shaded square? Okay, so now we have how many little squares here? Well, we have 10 in each of these columns. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Okay, we also have 10 by 10. 10 times 10 is 100. Okay, so we're looking at just this one square in this entire big giant picture. Well, that's one square out of 100 total squares. Okay, 1 out of 100 total squares. And then it says, write that part as a decimal and a fraction. Okay, so the great part is we wrote it as a fraction. Now we're going to write it as a decimal. Now our hundredths place is different than our thousandths place. So we're going to start by putting a 0 in the whole number position, a 0 in the tenths position, and because there's one square shaded, we are a 1 in the hundredths position. Okay? All right, let's look at part C. Part C says divide the enlarged hundredths. So they took one of these little tiny squares and they just blew it up to make it big so we could see it. Okay? So divide the enlarged hundredth square into 10 equal columns or rectangles. So essentially we're taking this little tiny square right here in the corner. They've zoomed it out to make it big so that we can actually do the work in there. And we're going to create 10 columns, just like we did with our big one. Give you those notches to work with. Okay, now we've taken this small square and we've divided it into 10 equal pieces. Okay, and then it says if each hundredth, so this little tiny square, if each of these little tiny squares is divided into 10 of these, so we went through and we drew 10 little tiny columns in every single one of those tiny squares. If each hundredth square is divided into 10 equal rectangles, how many parts will the model have? Okay, how many parts will the model have? So we have 100 of these squares. 100 of these squares. I'm actually going to write that here. And we're timesing it by 10 of these little tiny rectangles. Well, 100 times 10 is equal to 1,000. Okay, 1,000. So we would have 1,000 parts. Okay? Then it says the second part to part C down here, says to use a third color to shade one rectangle of the enlarged hundredth square. So let's shade one of these in. Okay. What part of the whole is the shaded rectangle? Well, if we look at this as a whole, that's 1 out of 1,000 pieces. 1 out of 1,000 pieces. Okay, and then it says to write the part as a decimal and a fraction. So we wrote it as a fraction. Now we're going to write it as a decimal. 0 in the whole number position, 0 in the tenths, 0 in the hundredths, 1 in the thousandths position. Okay? So I know that this is kind of difficult to see and to understand, but we're going to do a bunch of examples and we're going to work through some of these together, okay? So I want to look at page 152. That's just the next page here. Page 152, and I want to look down here. Sorry, I'm trying to get this positioned right. Where it says make connections. So it's kind of that second half of page 152. We're going to look at where it says make connections, okay? So we're going to look at this chart here and this chart down here as well. The relationship of a digit in different place value positions is the same with decimals as it is with whole numbers. You can use your understanding of place value patterns and a place value chart to write decimals that are 10 times as much as or 1/10 of a decimal, okay? So 10 times as much, 1/10 of, okay? We're going to take a look at down here, actually, because this is where I'm going to teach you a few tricks to decide what 10 times as much as is and 1/10 of is, okay? So it says, use the steps below to complete the table. Step 1, write the given decimal in a place value chart. They've actually given us some decimals here. So they've given us 0.03, 0.1, 0.07. And we're going to talk about what that decimal actually turns into. We use a word for it, okay? And it's a word you use all the time, okay? All right. Step 2, use the place value chart to write a decimal that is 10 times as much as the given decimal. So they've actually given us this chart right, or this column right here, and we're going to write a decimal that is 10 times as much as, okay? Then we're going to also, in step 3, use the place value chart to write a decimal that is 1/10 of the given decimal. 1/10 of the given decimal. Okay, so 10 times as much as. I want you to write the word bigger up here. That means that decimal is going to be bigger. Okay, 1/10 of is going to be smaller. Okay, we're going to look at these together. So we have 0.03. That's our decimal that we're starting with. It's asking us to write a decimal that is 10 times as much as. Ignore this line through here. It's the printer that does it, okay? 10 times as much as. So we're going to take a look at it. We see the 10. There's 1 0 in the 10th position. 1 0 in the 10th position. So we're going to take our decimal and we're going to move it one place to the right. So we're going to go like this. Boom. Now we have 0.3, which we don't put 2 zeros typically. So we're just going to put 0.3. 10 times as much, we move it to the right. Okay, then we're going to go back to our original decimal here, and I'm going to actually erase this so I can show you from scratch. 1/10 of, hold on guys, the light's flipped off. Okay, 1/10 of, okay? So when it's smaller, we're actually going to start at our decimal point. We look at 1/10, the 10 has 1 0, so that tells me I'm going to move my decimal point one place, but this time I'm moving it to the left. So I've got my decimal here, move it over one spot. Now I have decimal point 003. Okay, smaller. We're going to move it to the left. All right. Now we're going to do it for the next one. Okay, this is 0.1. 10 times as much as. Okay, we know we're moving it to the right. The 10 has 1 0, so we're taking our decimal point and we're moving it over one spot. Okay, so now we have 1.0. We put a 0 after that decimal point as a placeholder to show that there's nothing there. Okay, and we're going to start fresh with this one again. Smaller, 1/10 of, so we know we're moving to the left. The 10 has 1 0, so we're going to take this and we're going to go one spot to the left. So now we have decimal point 0.01. Okay, and finally this last one here, we have 0.07, okay, 0.07, and we are going to make it 10 times as much as, or it's going to be bigger. We're moving to the right, and we have 1 0 in the number 10, so we're going to move it one position to the right. 1. So we have 0.7. That other 0 that's out here can go away because zeros are used as a placeholder. Okay, 0.7. Okay, and finally the last square here, 1/10 of. So we're going to take a look at, I'm going to erase this. We've got our decimal point. There's 1 0 in the number 10. It's smaller. We're moving to the left. So we go one place over. We now have decimal point 007. Okay? Decimal point 007. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of these others on the Share and Show page because I want to do some examples with you. So we're on page 153 at the top where it says Share and Show. Okay. Now, I know that these models can look a little bit scary. I'm going to tell you why I love models. When I was in school and I was growing up, I loved to be able to see pictures. Okay? Pictures help me learn personally, and so I love to be able to see pictures. Okay? And I think you're going to like the pictures. I know you look at it and you go, oh, geez, that looks scary. But I think you're going to like these pictures because these pictures are actually really helpful. Okay? So let's look at number 1 first. It says, write the decimals shown by the shaded parts of each model. So they have some shaded pieces over here. This square is cut into 100 little tiny squares. Then they took one of these little tiny squares and they made it a little bit bigger off to the side and they cut that into 10 columns. And then they shaded a portion of that as well. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at these models and we're going to create decimals with them. Okay? So let's look at it. Let's first of all count how many columns we have that are totally colored in. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns that are fully colored in. This one's only partially colored in, right? So let's start with a 6. Okay? Then we're going to look at the next piece, which is how many squares are in the partially colored in one. Well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to take a look at that piece that they made bigger, and we're going to count how many pieces are shaded here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And because this is not a full whole, we have to put a decimal point. That is your answer. Decimal point 665. Okay, I want to skip to 3 and then we're going to do probably 4 after that. Let's look at number 3, okay? So, first of all, we look at this. This is a whole piece here. We only have parts of it, so we know we have to start with a decimal point, okay? We're not working with a whole because it's not all shaded in. We're going to count the columns that are fully shaded in right on this bigger piece. So we've only got 1 here, okay? Then we're going to look at the piece that's partially shaded in. We're going to count how many squares there are. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we're going to look at this piece and we have 1 shaded in. That is your decimal. Okay? This is exactly why I love pictures. Okay? Exactly why I love pictures. It is so much easier for me to see this. Okay, let's look at 4. 4 is a little different. I'm actually going to zoom it in because it's kind of hard to see. Okay, let's look at 4. We're going to first of all look at this and we're going to say, okay, this is a whole. Now, it's not all colored in, right? There's one square that's not. So we know we're working with a decimal. And we are looking at how many of these columns are totally shaded in, okay? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we're looking at this last column that's not totally shaded in, and we are going to count the squares that are shaded in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we have to look at this piece here. Are there any thousandths shaded in? Nope. So we can either leave it like that or add a 0 as a placeholder. Okay? Either way works. I want you to look at number 2. Do number 2 on your own. Pause the video, do it. Then come back and see if you got the same answer as me. Okay? So you should have paused this video. All right, we're looking at how many columns are totally shaded in this whole. Okay, we know we're working with a decimal because the whole thing's not shaded. So we've got 1, 2, 3 columns that are totally shaded in. Then we look at the one that's only partially shaded and we count the squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we look at this one and we count what's shaded in here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 0.398. If you got that answer, great. You totally get this. If not, you may have to go back and rewatch this to see what you did wrong. All right, we're going to move down here to where it says complete the sentence. Then we're going to look at these tables and we're going to fill in the tables, okay? So complete the sentence. This is actually just like what we did on the page before this, okay? The only thing that's a little different is it's not in a place value chart, okay? All right, so let's look at it. We have 0.6 is 10 times as much as, and we have to figure out what belongs here. Okay, well, I told you on the page before this that whenever you see 10 times as much as, you know that it's going to be a bigger number. You also know that you have to move to the right. And we look at 10, which has 1 0. So we're going to take our decimal point, we're going to move it one spot to the right. Now we have 6 point, and we're going to add a 0 as a placeholder. 6.0. Oh, my neck. Okay. Let's see. I am actually, since we did that on the page before this, I want to look at these ones down here. On page 153, I want to look at this place value chart, which is numbers 9, 10, 11, and 12, okay? 9, 10, 11, and 12. So it says use place value patterns to complete the table, okay? So use place value patterns to complete the table. 10 times as much we know is going to be bigger. 1/10 of is going to be smaller. Okay? They give us our decimal that we're starting with. We have to fill in all these blanks right here. Okay? So we have 0.2. So we look at it and we know 10 times as much, this number's got to be bigger. Okay? The number we put in here has to be bigger. Okay? 10 times as much, we look at the 0 in the 10, and we move our decimal point one place because there's 1 0 to the right. Okay, so now we have 2 decimal point. We're going to put a 0 because we have to have something before and after it, and 0 is a great placeholder. Okay, now let's look at 1/10 of. I'm going to start fresh with my decimal point over here. 1/10 of. So we know it's going to be smaller. We have 1 0 in that 10. So we're going to take our decimal point, we're going to move it one position to the left. Now we have decimal point 0, 2. Okay, let's look at this. We have 0.07. 10 times as much is going to be bigger. We have 1 0 in 10, so we're going to move it one position to the right. So we now have 0.7. I know there's 2 zeros here, but you only have to write one of them because it's just a placeholder. Okay, 1/10 of is going to be smaller. Let's start with our decimal point again. 1/10 of is going to be smaller. Okay, there's 1 0 in the 10, so we're going to move it one position over to the left. So we have decimal point 007. Okay, let's look at this one, and then you're going to do that last one by yourself. So we have 0.05, 10 times as much. We know it's going to be bigger. We have 1 0 in the 10. We're going to move it one space to the right. So we now have 0.5. And then 1/10 of, we know is going to be smaller. Let's start with this again. We want to move it, because of that 0, one place over to the left. So we now have 0.005. Try filling in these two blanks on your own. Pause the video. I'm going to fill them in. Come back and see if you got the right answer. Okay, let's look at it. 0.4, 10 times as much, we know is going to be bigger. Okay, because of that 0 in the 10, we're going to move it one place over to the right. So we now have 4 decimal point. We're going to add a 0 as a placeholder. And then 1/10 of, we're going to look at, and we're going to say, okay, it's going to be smaller. There's 1 0 in the 10th, so we're going to put one position over to the left. So we now have 0.04. Okay? Those are your answers. I hope that's what you got. All right, we are going to move on to page number, these pages are sticking, 155. Okay, that's the first page on your homework. Page 155, okay? I'm going to tell you what problems you are going to be working on, and then you are going to go and fill in the Google Sheets with your, or the Google form with your answer, okay? All right, so on page 155, you are working on number 2, 3. I want you to work on 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then I want you to work on page 156. I want you to work on number 1 and 2. 1, 2, and 4 on that page, okay? So on page 155, you are working on number 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Page 156, you are working on 1, 2, and 4. That is a total of 9 problems. 9 problems today. Have a great day. If you need to go back and watch this video, please do so. You can also give me a call at 385-646-2034. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.